everyone, welcome to this interview which is part of the Right Stuff for the CMC. I'm Jen Wakefield. I'm a former primary teacher, stand-up comedian and now a presenter and writer, and I'm at the start of my screenwriting career, and I'm very curious to find out more about how to get into children's books and how they can be an exciting avenue for getting an idea on screen. So in order to find out more, I'm feeling very lucky as I get to ask the amazing award-winning illustrator Dapo Adeola about his process, and he is now a writer of children's books as well as being an illustrator. So we also want to look at the crossover there and find out more about his world. So hello Dapo, and thanks for coming on today.
Hey Jen, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Dapo, we want to get to know you as an artist primarily first and find out about your process. So I want to go back to the beginning in order to do this and find out really what inspired you when you were little Dapo, when you were baby Dapo, toddler Dapo, child Dapo.
Cool. Stories, like, honestly, and the thing is, it's one of those weird things where I didn't even know I was being inspired at the time, if that makes any sense. I just really enjoyed stories. I've always loved stories. Earliest thing I can remember was visually being inspired by cartoons that I watched as a kid, like the X-Men, Dexter's Lab, Mask, He-Man, all those kind of awesome 80s/90s cartoons, and then came video games and Mario and Sonic and all those characters and the worlds that they inhabited, and the stories that were told through those levels and games that we played. So that's the earliest inspiration that I can remember, and I think my first time sort of with books, being inspired by books and illustration, was coming across Roald Dahl's work and C.S. Lewis's work as a kid. I was about 7 when I started reading those books, and I think that's the first time that I ever felt that urge to translate what I was taking in, like to spit something out, to start drawing basically. So yeah, that's the earliest I can remember.
When did you decide that, illustrating was something that you could do or wanted to do as a career?
So my story is a little bit weird.
We like weird.
I didn't actually know I could. So I went to study graphic design and advertising in uni, and it was not what I thought it was going to be at all. I actually got turned down from some of the illustration courses that I applied for because I kind of, if I'm going to be honest, I applied in a half-hearted fashion. I just didn't have that confidence. I didn't think I was going to get through. I was like quite young. And I came from a background where I was left alone to figure things out. I didn't have, some people have parents who get involved and steer them in the right direction and make them aware of the wider world of education and the things that are available to them. I didn't have that. So there was a lot that I was trying to figure out. Not only was I trying to sort of navigate adolescence and figuring out how to be a teen, I was also trying to figure out what tomorrow looked like. The only thing that I knew I wanted to do was to draw. That was it. Like, I held on to that as tightly as I could. So I studied graphic design and advertising. I went through the first 2 years of this degree course drawing all the time. And I got to my third year, I did a dissertation on how to teach children various things with picture books, with children's picture books. I wrote a cracking dissertation. I was quite happy with it. I got into my final sort of tutorial, and we had like 3 months of the course left. And my project was that I was going to remake the Tortoise and the Hare as accounting book. I still might do it one day, but I had this whole story mapped out about how the tortoise cheats, and there's actually 10 of him. And it was a counting book, and I got to the last tutorial and I was told that I'm going to fail because it wasn't a graphic design degree dissertation that I was doing. I was doing an illustration dissertation. Now, the funny thing about that, I have a bit of a gripe with higher education because of this. So I had 2 other tutorials prior to this one tutorial, and I kept getting told, hey, this is looking good, because it was looking good. And it was in the third tutorial that I was then told that maybe I should consider an illustration degree. And that was in my last year with 3 months left to finish the course. And again, not having anybody to sort of fall back on, I was really discouraged. So I just stopped coming in, just gave up completely. And it was one of my lecturers from my first year who called me in, and he was like, he's a friend of mine now. He was like, I love your work. I think your work is amazing. Just whatever happens, just don't stop drawing. And corny as it sounds, I took that in and I took that with me going forward, and it really, really helped to kind of be able to lean on that for the years that followed. So finished the course, didn't graduate, didn't get any, any accreditation or anything. Just left basically, and then I went into full-time employment for a while, and I just didn't stop drawing. And I think when the internet really opened up and we had social media and we could see how people lived across the pond, that's the first time that I actually saw people that looked like me doing illustration. That's the first time I was able to actually really connect the dots. A lot of the inspiration and influence was coming out of America. There were black artists who were doing things, and I was finding out that there had been black artists who had been doing things for a long time. We didn't really get shown that over on this side. So I was working, I think it was 2009, I was working in a job as a salesperson at a gym, and I really, really enjoyed the job and I was pretty good at it. But I just was always drawing all the time, and I was coming up to 25, and I had this thing, and I was like, look, if you don't take a chance and try and sort of pursue illustration now, you're never going to do it. You don't have any kids, you don't have a wife, there's nobody depending on you. If you can take that risk, take it now. So I made that switch at 25, and I switched from full-time to part-time. I became a receptionist at the same gym I was working at, and then I started to scour the internet for just any resources I could get my hands on that allowed me to learn how to become a better illustrator. Like, I had all this what's the word I'm looking for here, intuitive knowledge, if you will, of how stories were told, what makes a good story. I just didn't know how to do it. So there were so many things that I needed to pick up and learn. I needed to learn the language around it. I think coming out of my failure at university was when I learned that illustration was the name for what I actually wanted to do. So once I figured that out, I started to, dig deeper and do the research to figure out what type of illustration I wanted to do. My work started off very different to what people know me for now. I had this huge influence from comics and manga and Japanese woodblock print art, and it just took off from there. And I think I had this thing at the time where my whole thing was, and I tell this to people all the time, when you're not getting paid for a living to make artwork, that's the time to be self-indulgent, because being self-indulgent means that you lean into what you enjoy drawing, and it to a large extent determines what comes back in. When you put your work out and people see what you can do, it determines the type of work that comes back in. So it just started from there, and that was in, I think, 2009, 2010. And I met Nathan, who is the author of the Look Up series, during that time as well. I met him in 2010, and we worked together on something that didn't really go anywhere, but we became good friends off the back of that. And neither of us knew where this friendship was going to take us down the line. So I think that's the beginning. That's the coverage of the beginning of my career.
Yeah, that's a really good potted history of the origins of Dapo as an illustrator coming out there. And it's interesting that you had met Nathan already as well prior to the book coming out. So how did that develop from your friendship and then your relationship onwards to the books?
So I met Nathan in 2010, and at the time Nathan was starting out in theatre and acting on screen, and he was a writer as well. Like, Nathan is a ridiculously talented individual. So at the time I was focusing on character design, and I always knew I wanted to make children's books, from my dissertation, but I didn't. It's this weird thing where I wasn't obsessed with the idea of making children's books. I didn't see that as the only thing I must do. I wasn't narrow-minded. I was like, oh, I love doing this thing. If it pays off, it pays off. I'm going to make a book at some point in time. I was very much like, I'm just going to try whatever I want to do. I wasn't obsessed, because I meet people now who are really I'm going to be the greatest children's book illustrator. And, I love that for you, but I think it helps to keep that lid wide open in the box, because you just don't know where things are going to take you. And my life is a testament to that. I never knew I was going to end up here. It wasn't the goal. So Nathan and I worked on a project in 2010 together. It didn't really go anywhere, but we liked how we both worked. And what I love about working with Nathan is he always plants the seed, and he allows me to water it and harvest he allows me to bring that plant to life. And the seed is so simple for me. It's just like a few words, that describe what you're trying to do and what the character is, and you leave me enough room to bring myself into the project as well. We worked together in 2010. Then 2015, Nathan approached me about Rocket, and he was like, I've got this idea for a children's book character, and I think you're the person that can design it for me. And he gave me like a really short description, you know, black girl, loves space, glasses, big hair. That was my brief. And I had to go away and come up with what she would look like. And we explored a couple of different things. I based her on my niece. My niece was 6 at the time, and that was the target age that was Rocket's age. And I just went away, did some illustrations, showed them to Nathan. And Nathan does this thing sometimes, which is a bit annoying, but I get it. It's this thing where, like, when I show him stuff, he's like, this is amazing, this is it. And I'm like, dude, I kind of I would love some feedback. But the thing I did realize though, is I am very thorough with my own self. So I've pretty much, like, I've torn this design apart, put it back together so many times that there's very little room to add any sort of massive feedback that's going to change the trajectory of everything. So I'm very thorough with my work. I'm very hard on myself when it comes to my work. So I'd already done so much of that. And then Nathan's talent agency that he was with at the time, he's still with, they merged with a literary agency. And he took some of my drawings to the literary arm of the agency. At the time, I knew nothing about agents. I knew nothing about the trajectory. I was just like, I'm going to go out there, put my work out there, and whatever comes. Prior to me, being represented by the agency, I'd actually made very good, I'd made very good sort of steps towards a career in illustration. I had started displaying my work. I displayed work internationally. I held an annual art show of my work. I was just doing a lot of things to kind of keep me working, basically. So this took it to a more solid and more professional level when the agent asked me to come in. She's now my agent. Her name is Sally Ann. She's been my agent for almost a decade now. It's been 8 years now. So she asked me to come in. I came in. I remember the meeting. I was very fresh in terms of, I knew nothing about anything. I knew what I knew about making books. And, she asked me a few questions about what I wanted out of this. And I'm like, I just want to make books. I want to tell stories. I knew from then, this is going to come up later, but I knew from then that I wanted to write as well. I've always known I wanted to write. That was never a thing. I didn't separate the two. I just saw it as storytelling, So I came in, sat down. She talked me through what it is to be represented by somebody. I asked her if I have to pay her anything. She was like, nope. She gets paid when I get paid. I said, all right, fine. I signed. And then she I tightened up the artwork, changed a few things on the designs according to what she was telling me. Obviously, she's the knowledge. I knew nothing about the inner workings of the industry. So she got me to change Rocket to make her, like, push the cute factor, if you will. And I did that. And then she took the work out. We missed the Frankfurt Book Festival, which was in October of that year of 2016. We missed that. But then we caught the Bologna Children's Book Festival, which is, I think, the bigger of the two. And that happened in April of the following year, 2017. And she got back from Bologna and I was like, oh, so how did it go? And she was like, yeah, a few people were interested. And Sally Ann does this thing where she likes to play it down. And basically, when she sent me a list of the publishers that were interested, I'm Nigerian. We tend to want to find out how big a deal things are. So I went online and I Googled top 10 publishers in the world, and 8 of them were on the list, and it was bananas. So that's the first inkling that I got that something serious was going down. The second was when my Twitter account started getting followed by people who were working in the industry. And it's a Twitter account that I didn't really use at the time. And I was like, okay, this is looking big. Then we had May that year, 2017. Nathan was filming at the time and he got a day off and he came into London, and Sally Ann had set up a series of meetings with different publishers that had expressed interest. So on the day, we met with 6 different publishers, and bearing in mind, Nathan and I had no history of success in this field. Nobody knew I could make a picture book from end to end. I didn't know I could make a picture book from end to end. I'd never done it before. I'd never drawn anything beyond a character against a white background. It was a lot. So we ended up that day, May the 8th, 2017. I'll never forget it. We ended that day with 3 offers. I came home and I sat down on my bed and I was just staring at the wall for like an hour thinking, okay, what the hell? we finished that month of May with 12 offers from various publishers. And we ended up going with Puffin because we had a good feeling, and they made us a really astounding offer that we would have been absolutely bananas to turn down. And that was it. That was how it all started.
That's amazing. So you've gone from keeping your door wide open, like you said, without this sort of plan of going into children's books, to, in a way, like you and Nathan obviously had the intuition to know that you had something special, or just to follow that. And that is a choice as part of your process still, you know, to decide that you've got something and it's worth pursuing. That's still a choice you made that ended up paying off amazingly. So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think a thing that's going to come up based on the questions you sent me before is that whole thing about keeping your mind open to what's going to come. And I say that because on this journey, I've encountered people who I can see that they have the potential to be amazing illustrators, but they've been obsessed with doing something else in the arts. And I'm like, okay, there's nothing that while you're waiting for that door to open, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from pursuing this. So I'll give an example. I hope the person doesn't mind. I'm not going to name any names, but I met an awesome illustrator who was obsessed with working as a character designer in animation. And that's something I love. That's what brought me here. And I recognized in them the ability to make books. And I was like, look, I've been fortunate enough to work as a character designer in animation. I worked with Disney, and it was a project that they sought me out for, but they only managed to seek me out because the books I'd worked on came across their desk, you know? So I was trying to make this person understand that those two worlds go hand in hand. And the difference between what I'm doing and what they would end up doing is that by Disney being the people to seek me out, I get to start working on a project at a higher level. If I'm going through the traditional routes, there's a chance that I might end up working at a project, but at a very, very, very low level where there's no decision making involved. You know, I think books give you that opportunity to come in, especially if they're going to adapt your book. You come in at a much higher level. Your say carries a lot more weight than if you're just, you know, working at the ground level. So that's another thing that will come up a little later on.
That's great, because essentially you're saying, you know, you're putting your product out there, your brand you out there, for it is reaching a wide audience for people to see. It kind of help cross-pollinate and help opportunities build and elevate in different ways, right?
It's far easier for a book to act as a portfolio than it is for a portfolio to act as a portfolio. If you have something great in the form of a book and it goes out there, it's like it's a portfolio, and it does multiple things, because the feedback you're getting isn't necessarily just from the one group of people that you're sending your portfolio to. It's from your readers. You know, some books aren't the most amazing thing visually. They're not the most, but people love them. They love them for different reasons, and what a lot of studios are looking for is not necessarily the flashiest artwork. They're just looking for stories that connect with people, and they want to harness that phenomena on the screen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now you've gone from being an illustrator, having this quite extraordinary journey with the Rocket books and with Nathan, and illustrating on loads of incredible projects, Dapo. And now you're, I want to say, crossing over to becoming an author, but you've obviously always been a storyteller through your work. But how did that tipping point occur for you?
It occurred a while ago, if I'll be honest with you. My first book as an author came out in 2021. It was a picture book called Hey You. It was written by myself, and it was more of a project because I got, I think, 18 of my favorite illustrators at the time to work with me on bringing the story to life. And that book went on to win the British Book Award in 2022. So I feel like it's safe to say that it's no longer, I'm not starting out as an author anymore. I think we passed that point a couple of years ago. So the trick now is not sort of sitting on that achievement, because it was a massive achievement to come out the gate and win with my first book as an author. The trick now is to sort of overlook that and focus on becoming a better storyteller for this next step. How the transition for Hey You came about, it was during 2020, I'm sad to say. And I'm sad to say so because it took the death of George Floyd for that opportunity to present itself. At the time, that death galvanized me to think about what kind of stories we get to tell as Black people. And I found that we were telling a lot of stories in the children's book space that sort of explain why we deserve to exist. And we weren't necessarily talking to other Black people. We were talking to non-Black people about why we deserve to exist. And I didn't quite like that. So Hey You was an opportunity to celebrate the culture that I come from, the people that I come from, and also to sort of say I love you to like the diaspora, man, and to showcase the talent that exists in said diaspora as well, and the variety of different types of people that you can find in the diaspora. So yeah, that's how that came about.
There's a saying that I love, which is like, from dissatisfaction comes progress. And it's sad, it's awful to have a starting point which feels so sad, but you've obviously brought this piece of work out which has been recognised and is award-winning, Dapo. So, and I've seen the book. It's absolutely beautiful. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised it won the award. And now, am I right that you're moving towards middle grade books?
I am indeed. I'm moving towards early fiction. We're not quite sure where it's going to land, if I'm going to be honest. I haven't written it yet, so we're not quite sure where it's going to land. The age range is, I think, 9 to 12 is the age range that we're looking at. So I would say that is middle grade. So yeah, moving towards that. Bigger word count. I've illustrated young fiction before. Young fiction / middle grade. I've illustrated it before, but writing it is a completely different animal. So yeah, exciting times ahead.
Do you think that perhaps those things that excited you are going to come back into the inspiration process for you, Dapo? You know, the immersion into games, the superhero kind of stories. Do you think that's going to come back into it?
So for the last few hours, I've been busy on my Nintendo Switch trying to rack up that inspiration. Because the thing is, it's research, but it's also fun. And if I'm going to be really honest, over the last few years, I feel like the fun battery is just depleted completely because this has become work. And I'm in a very funny transitional space with it all at the moment, where I'm thinking about how to bring the fun back into what I do. The industry, the seriousness of the industry can rob you of that. And it's hard sometimes to... I found myself, anyway, pouring from an somewhat empty cup in the last couple of years. And that's because I'd done so much work at the beginning, and I put so much into it, poured so much from myself at the beginning, that there was just very little left. I've only been published for 5 years this year, so 5 years today. Oh my god, today is the 2nd of April, so it's 5 years today. My first book came out 5 years ago today. So yeah, I've only been published for that amount of time, but during that 5 years, it feels like twice the time. It feels like at least I've been working for 10 years, and that's because of my output and various other things. But I found myself really burnt out, for want of a better phrase, over the last couple of years. And I'm not mad at it, if I'm going to be honest. I have a thing where I think that in order for you to progress from one step to the other, I think burnout is almost an inevitable factor. And I think what you have to get good at is recognizing when you're burnt out and when to say no, and how to sort of stop just before you get to that place and allow yourself enough rest and, you know, restore the energy and the good stuff. So that's where I'm at the moment. And I'm hoping to be able to at least get a decent amount of that energy back before having to pour back into this new series.
Well, that sounds like you've also had a real kind of hot wiring experience in 5 years of understanding your cycles and what you might go through as a creative in this industry, because that probably brings me nicely just to asking you about, you know, advice for resilience, or advice for maybe the question isn't how do you stop burnout, but how do you manage being a creative and keep resilient in the industry?
This is something that's still very much an ongoing thing for me. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'll give you an example. Look Up actually put me into therapy at the time because it was so much that was happening, and I had all these coping mechanisms for things that went out the window once we started working on this book. And once the book came out, and all the sort of things that came at me afterwards as well. Like, success is great. It's absolutely brilliant, but it's something that nobody prepares you for, you know? Like, I always tell people all the time, like, be careful what you wish for when it comes to success, because it's great that the phone doesn't stop ringing, but it's also not great because the phone never stops ringing, and you feel obligated to say yes to so many things. And one of the first tips I'm going to give people is don't do that. Like, say yes to as much as you can manage. And sometimes you don't know how much you can manage till you're in it, right? But the minute it starts to feel too much, start saying no. And then on top of that as well, always learn, because I learned my limits from that. Like, I took on a lot of work at the beginning. I had no idea how things were going to go. I just knew that I needed to have a career, and one book does not make a career. So I took on a lot of work in the beginning. I don't regret any of the books that I took on, if I'll be honest, but it was too much work because there wasn't enough time for me to have fun, to play. And I think that's very, very important. You must always, whether you're writing or illustrating, you must always make time to play, make time to draw for yourself, make time to write for yourself, because that's where you grow. That's where you get to have fun. That's where the joy still remains, because work is hard. This is hard work. There are deadlines. There are several factors that you have to kind of consider: working with other people, collaborating, being open to feedback from publishers. All of that stuff can take a toll on you. So it's important to make sure that you carve out time for yourself to just create for yourself as well, which is something that I'm hoping to be able to get back to, because I think that's what keeps the work fresh. That's what keeps the job fresh. You don't start to stagnate. Like, someone put something out on Twitter the other day, in response to a tweet. They were talking about, if you're not enjoying drawing, then you're doing something wrong. And I felt that was a bit harsh, if I'm going to be honest with you, because there can be a number of reasons why you're not enjoying drawing. And I am in a space where I haven't been enjoying drawing for a long time. So I'm just trying to sort of get out of it. And I think that's a very one-size-fits-all statement to make regarding you doing something wrong if you're not enjoying something that you normally enjoy. And I think you owe it to yourself to always kind of search and take that as a sign to start searching and looking into why you're not enjoying it, as opposed to just thinking, oh, I'm doing something wrong. You might not be doing anything wrong. It might just be that it's too much and you're overwhelmed and you need to take time to draw and create for yourself without looming deadlines and publishers on your neck kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I think when you've been in it for a while, you perhaps can tell some of the things that you might be able to turn down. It's probably quite hard when you're starting, but maybe you get some kind of intuition. Like you said, you get signs and signals to yourself that actually this is a sign I need a break, and just planning that break or play, like you said.
A huge part of this as well is that making books, writing books, successfully doing so is not just about the writing and the illustrating. There's another stage that comes afterwards that nobody prepares you for, and that's going out into the world with your book. We do school visits, we do numerous festivals and events, and that is something. I mean, some people are naturally inclined to that. Like Nathan and I, for example, we're just polar opposites when it comes to that. Nathan has that stage and drama background, so he can project very well, whereas I'm very reserved. Like, so initially, when I was lucky to have Nathan as a partner in the first early stages, because we got to really bounce off each other very well. And because he was there, he could do the projecting and I could be a bit more laid back, and kids loved that kind of double act that we had. But I was also lucky enough to be able to soak off him, so that when it came to time for me to do things on my own, I found a balance between my reserved nature and the need to project to children, and it worked out for me. But if I didn't have that at the beginning and I went into this, it would have been tricky. I'm not the best at I'm not the most extroverted person in the world at all. So it would have been tricky. But even having that, going out, doing it by myself, you have to really get behind your work in this industry. You have to get behind your work. You have to make sure that you are comfortable with being quite visible as well, when it comes to your work. And that takes energy. That takes a lot of energy. I think people underestimate how much energy it takes. For the first few events that we did, I was so drained. I'd come home and I'd just crash, and it would happen all the time. And through the process of therapy, for example, I realized that I've had social anxiety for a long time, and I didn't know. I actually didn't know. I had all these coping mechanisms for dealing with it because of the life that I led at the time. Now I'm leading a completely different life, and everything's happened so quickly. I didn't know how to cope. So I was always low in energy, just finding myself easily irritable. So I thought, okay, let's go to therapy. Let's find out what's going on. And I described some of the things I was going through. And the therapist at the time was like, hey, that sounds like social anxiety. I didn't know that social anxiety has a spectrum. I thought that it presented in one way and only one way. I thought it was things like being afraid to go outside, interact with people, and leave the house and all these things. But that wasn't it at all. Like mine's was because I was overwhelmed like by everything, and it was creating this anxiety. So just learning a bit about yourself and being self-aware, it goes a long way. I knew there was something wrong, and I knew that I needed to go and get help, basically. So yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think people watching this will understand, if they're creative, you know, how vulnerable you have to be and what that takes. So, you know, I really appreciate you sharing that, and I'm sure it will resonate. And actually that makes me think about this, something I wanted to ask you, Dapo, with regards to how you work and when you work solo, because people think of authorship and being an illustrator as a solo endeavour, and of course there's time you have to be alone, but how much of your time is spent alone versus being a collaborator, and was it different to your expectations?
It was very different to my expectations. Prior to working in this way, I'd always worked alone. So when I was freelancing, just taking on commissions from people, I always worked alone. You know, it was me, my desk, whatever, just get on with it. Now I'm working with an author, so that's one. Then I'm also working with an editor, that's two. Then I'm also working with the designer. Then there's the input that the sales team and the larger team at the publisher have on what I'm doing as well. There is such a thing as too many cooks. There is definitely that, but the closer team that I work with at Puffin especially, they're an incredible team, and together we make great books. You know, my editor Joe is such an amazing person when it comes to just pulling out the thing that you're looking for. So Hey You, for example, the first draft of Hey You was very militant, very, very militant, and it was the space that I was in at the time. And Joe asked me one question that softened and changed everything. Initially, I was writing a letter to a child that I would hope to have a conversation with in the future. And Joe asked me a question about when the first time that I felt empowered as a black man was. And the book then became a letter to my past self, just from that. And it changed because I was speaking to myself as a child. You know, and it just changed. It changed everything. It's such a great question to be asked, and it just changed everything. And he has that. That's the magic that Joe does. He pulls out that thing that you're looking for. He helps you zone in on that. And that's something that I might have gotten to on my own, but I can't imagine how many drafts I would have had to go through and how many conversations I would have had to have that realization. Monica's the designer I work with at Puffin. She is phenomenal. Like, we have this shorthand that just, I've never had that with anybody else that I've ever collaborated with. Like, she understands what I'm going for, and she understands how to, again, pull out that thing. Because I might, like, again, I didn't study illustration. I don't have that background. So there's a lot of things I don't know the words for. I just know how to be like, oh, this is the feeling I'm going for. And she's like, oh, do you mean this? And I'm like, oh, that's it. And then I do my research. She does her bit. Boom. And it works. We do things, both of us, things that we've never done before. So Hey You's cover, for example, was something that was put together in a Zoom call. Like, we had a Zoom meeting, we were just catching up about the design of the cover, and we were talking about what we wanted to go for. And just Monica just started working. I started giving feedback. She'd send this, I'd send that. And an hour later, we had a cover, you know? That synergy is something that exists across all the books that I make with Puffin, and I'm hoping that it carries through into the other books I go to make in my career. I've worked with other teams, and I'm sad to say it's not the same. Like, it's not the same at all. I think it's important as an illustrator or an author to always ask for trust. Like, as I think what publishers like to do, and I've realized this with the teams I've worked with, is there's this thing where some of them don't know they're doing it. It's not an intentional thing. It's not malicious. But they try, especially if you're a new talent, they try to teach you how to suck an egg. And it's weird because I might be a new talent, but there's a reason I'm here. You know, you've asked me to come and do this job because I'm a storyteller. So trust me to tell stories. And there's this thing that publishers have where they want to put you into a box that they recognize, especially if you're a talent from a diverse background, someone that they've never worked with before, telling a story they've never told before. They want to instantly try and put you into a box that they recognize. And you owe it to yourself to push back against that. You need to understand when it is that they're trying to do that, and when it is that they're trying to tell you something that you don't know. You know, so it's a tricky one. It is a tricky one because I'm always ready for a scrap. So I think I just have that automatically. The duty is on you to prove to me why I need to go in this direction, because I'm ready to prove it. Like I said, with Rocket, for example, I was ready for all objections. I was ready for all the things. So if Nathan asked me this question, why is this there? I would have the answer because I've thought about it, you know? So that's the same way I am with anything. Anything I put on the table, I'm ready to back it. So if you're asking me to change it, you need to be telling me exactly why and how it's going to be better. And that's what the Puffin team are really good at doing. Other publishing teams I've worked with, they're not so good. Their answers tend to boil down to, that's just how it's done. And I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. So, you know, it's just learning that, and that's the trial by error. And, you know, you need to know how to advocate for yourself. If I know one thing, I've always known how to do that, because before publishing, I was working for myself already. So I knew how to advocate for myself. And I say something as well, coming into this, I'm realizing how young everyone is. I'm 41 this month, right? So I came in when I was like 34. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh man, I wish this had happened 10 years before when I was younger, blah, 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 blah. You think all those things. But I then realized that if it had happened when I was in my 20s, I'd probably, pardon my French, but I probably would have pissed it all away. I would have just made the wrong choices. I would have allowed so many things to happen, and I would have ended up completely disillusioned, and I would have felt taken advantage of. Why? Not necessarily because I was young, but because at the time I didn't know how to advocate for myself the way that I did when I was in my 30s. So coming in, and I speak to young people who are in this industry all the time, illustrators who are younger than me, authors who are younger than me, and the key thing I keep telling them to do is to trust themselves. Trust yourself. Advocate for yourself. Trust yourself. Because you're not being hostile. You're not being any of those things. You just believe so much in this book that you're making, this thing that you're doing, that you need, if someone's telling you that this isn't right, or you need to go in this direction, they owe it to you to explain to you fully why, in a manner that you understand. Because once you understand it, then you can either go and find another solution or accept it, right? If someone is telling you this is just how it's done, that's not good enough. Even if they're right, that's not good enough, you know? And that takes me back to this infantilization, which I think happens a lot in publishing as well. You know, you're kind of being told as if you're a child. That's the way people treat children, you know? Just do as I say kind of thing. And it's just like, hell no, like, no. So, yeah.
I feel like I've had a mentorship listening to you giving this advice. Already I'm like rolling my sleeves up thinking, when I go into that next meeting, like I feel strong from hearing you actually. It's really nice to hear you talking about how to sort of advocate for yourself, importantly, more importantly, and to sort of go in tooled up. So that's great, Dapo. I want to ask about books to screen, because there might be some newbies listening today, but there also might be people who have been in this for a while and are curious about how books translate to screen. I mean, at the London Book Fair this year, there were people out in full force from the TV and film industry looking at acquiring books. And I think out of 7 nominated films, or there were 5 films at the Oscars that had come originally from books that we didn't realise about. It wasn't necessarily widely written about in press. Is this something that, you know, people should perhaps pay a bit more attention to? Like, why is it a good idea to think about a book idea before screen, do you think?
Okay, it's a good idea to think about book before screen, because screen and TV and cinema and film and all that stuff, it's such an unpredictable, unreliable process. If your stuff gets picked up to be adapted, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get made. It can stay in limbo for ages. It can then get cancelled when one company decides to merge with another. It can just get lost. Or you can end up with the option deal running out and it just stays in option limbo forever. So my advice to anybody looking to tell a story, tell it in a book form. Book form gets to live on beyond all of those contracts. Even if it never gets picked up. Mallory Blackman told me an amazing story about Noughts and Crosses, which got picked up and made into a TV series. She told me about how many times it had been optioned. I think it was 11 times. And that's a lot of times. Over 30 years, that's a lot of time that it had been optioned before it finally got made. And don't quote me on that, but I know it was in the high figures. It's probably around 11, around that many times. And that opened up my eyes to something, because Lookup's currently optioned and we don't know if it's definitely going to get made. It's been optioned since 2019. So we don't know if it's definitely going to get made. But I am so lucky that this book exists, because I get to have a career while we're waiting for that news to happen. It might not get made this time around, but my career still goes on. The book helped me make the career that I have. It's the most popular book that I've worked on. If we had just optioned it first, who's to know what would have been tied to those option rights? I might not be able to explore it. Also, having had Lookup option, we also signed away merchandising rights as well, which limits the amount of things that I can do until that contract expires. So it taught me something. With the next property that I have, I definitely want to get it optioned, but that's not the priority. The priority is to tell a good story, to tell a story that children connect with, that readers connect with, a story that I'm proud of, you know, and also to, if I'm going to get it optioned, to make sure that I've exercised things like creating merch that I want to creating those things before I sign away any of the rights. And you know, it's on you to learn about the industry, to learn how these things work, to ask questions. And you know, I think prioritizing making your book and prioritizing the screen, I think that's not a good idea, if I'm going to be honest with you. If you're going to write a book, focus on that. Like, focus on it existing in that format. And with this new young fiction series that I'm working on, I'm fortunate again to be able to illustrate my stuff as well. So I do try and do this thing where when I'm illustrating it, and it helps because I come from a very cartoon-driven, animation-driven background. I try and illustrate it so that you can pick up the book and you can literally feel like you're watching it on the screen. That's about as close to considering the screen as I get. You know, but then again, it's still not with the view of getting it picked up for TV. It's just because I want people to visually experience my book as they would experience something that they're watching on TV. I want to have quite a cinematic style of illustration in the book, energy, dynamism, all those things in the book. If it gets picked up for screen, fantastic. If it comes across the desk of somebody who's looking for a book to adapt and they instantly get that vibe from the artwork, fantastic. If it doesn't, still fantastic.
Yeah, because it sounds like your priority is the story and the connection.
It has to be, because we can tell when you're just writing something for screen. As readers, we can tell, because what tends to happen is people tend to base what they're writing off of what's popular. So your stories don't feel original, you know. And that's not to say that every story has to be original. No one should be trying to reinvent the wheel, but they don't feel genuine. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dapo. I feel like I've had, by osmosis, I feel like I've had a kind of uplifting mentorship through listening to your story. And also I do feel like I have a good understanding of you as an artist, and the process is demystified a little bit by hearing about how it happened for you, and I think that's really important for our viewers. So thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.